Okay, so after you've set up the cameras, you've got them streaming. You're going to set up the broadcast controller, which is the mid tier that creates a layer for game show to um, retransmit. And I've got my system set up in a dual monitor setting, and basically so off screen. So see if you follow my cursor here, I'm going up screen. What I have off screen is game show, and so it's showing um, the monitor below it. Okay, so that's here on this browser. So in a Chrome browser, you go to a URL, will provide you the server address, probably be something like ppc.andrus.ca, and then the 9max viewer. And yeah, when you first come to this server, it looks a little bit messy, but the first thing you want to do is log in. So we'll give you a username and password to log into this server. And right off the bat, you'll get like a dealer message pop up, which we talked about in the when we were going over the dealer play controller tablet. If you say you put a game on break, for example, that's where this message would show up and pop up. And again, like this would be normally this would be off screen, not being rebroadcast. And in fact, I don't think it's not even movable. It just that's kind of a fixed position. It kind of makes sure that that doesn't pop up inadvertently in your broadcast. So close that. But in general, most of these things are movable, so so that you can place them or get them out of the way of the broadcast. So even the videos is movable. See, and so if I go into preferences, I get an option to do a few things. I can see I can use the three cameras. Right now they're just random, kind of pointing randomly. So this one's actually pointing at the output of the server. This one's the camera one behind the dealer, which is showing kind of the side shot of me. And then there's camera two, which would normally is shooting seats 9, 8, and 7. Okay, so we're actually giving you some instructions over a live server. This is what you'd be getting when you're setting up your broadcast controller. Of course, you'd be shooting appropriately configured camera angles based on the instructions we gave you in the camera setup. So there's a bunch of tools that are movable, and you can position them, on the display where you want them. And for the most part, that's obviously the digital table, the obviously the video stack sizes. You might want to move them out of the way at certain points in the game, and you can just arbitrarily go in and move it out of the way and position it however you like. There's game status. This kind of shows hand for hand what's happening, and someone doing color commentary could even theoretically just well, they can use that as cues anyway. They don't have to necessarily read right off of it, but they use those as cues. And then you have your pot size, and depending on if it's a full ring, I think this overlay is taking up a bit more space. I like it down in the bottom right corner myself. But if it was heads up, maybe you had player in seat 8 and a player in seat 2, you could bring this down, knowing that these other seats aren't being filled. Then bring that down. You can even and then bring the pot size down underneath of it, and that might be an alternative layout for a heads up type of game, right? So maybe in a tournament you're getting down heads up. Maybe you pause and you readjust things for heads up. Maybe. Normally I like the pot size up in the top corner, and I like the stack size up here. But anyway, what I want to point out though is that this is dual screen. So clearly, game show, like I mentioned, it's configured to rebroadcast this window. So if I just pull the browser up and get the tools out of the way, you'll see I have a blank canvas here. And so right now, that's what's being broadcast by gamers. It's blank canvas. So the first thing I obviously would want to position for the game is my video feed. And it's sizable, so you could have it fill fully the whole screen. Right? Like that. Or you can have it letterboxed a little bit. and it depends what you're doing. Like, I know when you use Chromecast off of you, like if you send to YouTube and then you Chromecast, um, sometimes like it'll trim the bottoms. So it's kind of nice to do something like this, maybe letterbox it and then bring the stack ticker maybe up in here like that, or maybe even overlay it a little bit to make sure it doesn't get cut off by Chromecast if you're Chromecasting. If you're not worrying about Chromecasting to larger screen, bigger screen, then you could use the whole thing. But if someone else is viewing it off of YouTube, then they might lose it. So it takes a little bit of playing with, but the whole point is you have a lot of flexibility with how where you can position this stuff, right? And so then we have individual, the session number, the level number, and the hand number, and the stakes. So as we talked about in the dealer controller, when you start a new session, you set the blind levels. That would winds up showing up here. So I don't know, where you would want that necessarily. Maybe if we have the pot size up in the top right, and then maybe we put the blinds and stakes kind of alongside it. Don't forget, like that's going to expand out once it gets filled in, right? It'll be like blinds, antes, small blind, big blind, antes. So do it like that, and maybe like the session could be down here, session number, level number, hand number. So the level, like basically, the terminology is a little bit confusing. Every time you start a new session from the game controller, this level number goes up. A session is really defined by every time you start a new broadcast. So every new broadcast would have a session incremented. So really, that's more like, Monday's game would be the first one, Tuesday's game would be the second one, Thursday's game would be the third, and so on and so forth. So whereas level numbers within the session, the first level being 1, and then the hands are across levels. So you would know, hey, for today's tournament, we're in hand number 200, level number 5. It's not the 200th hand of level 5; it's the 200th hand of all the levels. That's how the base package is anyway. And so then the other thing I want to mention. So then there's a game title. So I don't know. Maybe you have it centered like this, or maybe you don't have it on there at all, or maybe depending on, sometimes you have it in, sometimes you don't. You can drag it in and out. But it's set kind of one time from the server, and depending on the game, like maybe every day you set the final table differently, and that's where this control comes in. So in the session title override, you can say, if it's Thursday's game, then you can make it Thursday's game, which is cool. The other thing I wanted to mention, well, then there's also like kind of this other general message. So you can, as opposed to using game shows, layers, you can have a layer, even playing music and counting down if you wanted to using game show, and then pull that layer in. Or you can just use this setting here, which is a message setting. So you can say like, be right back, right, and then leave it there, and then obviously this control here that I'm using, you'd be using it off screen. I'm just bringing it down here so you can see how I'm doing it. But if you were setting it up and you were streaming live and you wanted to put this message up there, you'd be doing it with the control off the screen, like this. Okay, but let's say we don't have a message right now. We'll pull that off. And then the other neat thing is the shot clock. So shot clock, I know you guys aren't doing shot clock yet. I think soon that'll be pretty standard, maybe even in your daily tournaments. I like it in the top right corner, but you can put it wherever you want. Don't have to put it anywhere if you're not using it. The system automatically starts counting this back down, so between players. So as each player gets action, that gets reset to its initial value and starts counting down. And the system default is 30 seconds, but let's say you decided you want to do a shot clock for 45 seconds. You just go back over to the control, which is here, this control. And again, you'd be doing this off screen, but you go into shot clock and just make it 45. And you'll see it starts counting down from 45, and that's the new default for this session. So the system would then, for each player, when they get action, it would reset the shot clock to 45 seconds now. If you want it back to 30, then you just go, I want it back to 30. Not that you would do that in between a session, but just to show you that feature's there. Okay, So this would basically be the setup. You'd kind of lay it out this way, and then of course the big one is you'd bring in your table, your digital table, and place that. So this is, set up for assuming that you start out with a full ring, nine players. Any player that's not seated, the card doesn't show up. So that's why I was saying with the heads up. Let's say you had a player in seat 8 and seat 2, you could bring this right down here like that, give it room to bloom out for action, and then you could bring the pot size right down underneath the table if you wanted to, as an example. So you might change the layout dynamically depending on where you are in the game. But generally, the reason these are bloomed out like this is because this is what happens when player 4, seat 4 has action. It bubbles up to indicate that seat 4 has action, and then obviously the camera angles change and whatnot. So that's why to start out with, when you first log in, it's showing you this so that you know how far to place it in the corner so that it won't get cut off. Okay, and so that's kind of how I like to do the setup initially. And the whole point about it being movable is it's flexible, so you can do what you like with it. But this is how I would get the game started. Maybe I wouldn't have as much decoration on here, or I don't know. This isn't too bad. So anyway, that's what you would do. You log into the browser, extend your browser to take advantage of both monitors, and put your display on the one monitor. And Game Show is configured to broadcast that second monitor, which here's Game Show, and you can see it's broadcasting live what I've configured over here. And then of course you're using Game Show, you have other layers, other channels, other cameras that you want to bring in. You can bring those into and use Game Show to kind of set those live. But this is your main rendering. And once the game starts from the game controller and hands start being dealt, all the action just starts filling in and you're streaming.